Commander ZYX-941 sat in the dimly lit corner of the Galactic Veterans Hall, his forearms wrapped around a steaming cup of synthetic alcohol. The aged Krellian's blue-scaled skin bore the deep scars of countless battles. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Those orange orbs held a haunted look that only came from witnessing true horror. The younger veterans at nearby tables whispered among themselves, stealing glances at the legendary commander. Everyone knew his name. ZYX-941 had led the Third Galactic Fleet against the humans during the Great War of Expansion. He was supposed to be a hero, but those who looked closely could see the tremor in his hands, the way he startled at sudden noises. "Tell us about the humans, Commander," called out a young Vorthan soldier, his green tentacles waving with excitement. "The stories say you fought them for 3 years. What were they really like?" The hall fell silent. Even the bartender, a massive Gorlin with stone-like skin, stopped cleaning glasses to listen. ZYX-941's reputation preceded him, but he rarely spoke about his experiences with humanity. Most assumed it was because of classified military information. The truth was far more disturbing. ZYX-941 took a long drink from his cup, feeling the liquid burn down his throat. His mandibles clicked nervously as he considered whether to speak. After a moment, he set the cup down with a heavy thud that echoed through the quiet room. "You want to know about humans?" His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against metal. "I will tell you, but understand this: what I share tonight will change how you see the galaxy. The humans are not like us. They are not like anything that has ever existed." The young Vorthan leaned forward eagerly. Around the room, other veterans began to gather closer, their curiosity overcoming their respect for the commander's privacy. ZYX-941 noticed their movement but did not object. Perhaps it was time they knew the truth. "I first encountered human forces at the Battle of Kepler 442b, ZYX-941 began, his orange eyes growing distant with memory. "Intelligence reports told us they were a new species, recently discovered by our scouts. Primitive technology, they said. Minimal threat level. We expected an easy victory." He paused to take another drink, gathering his thoughts. The room remained perfectly silent, hanging on his every word. "Our fleet consisted of 47 heavy cruisers and 3 dreadnoughts. Standard formation for dealing with emerging civilizations. We had faced dozens of species during the expansion. The pattern was always the same: show overwhelming force, demand surrender, incorporate their worlds into the galactic collective. Simple, clean, efficient." A Thraxian veteran with cybernetic implants replacing half his face nodded knowingly. "The collective's standard procedure. Works every time." "That's what we thought," ZYX-941 continued. "When we arrived at their colony world, we found a small human settlement. Maybe 50,000 inhabitants. Their defensive fleet was laughable 12 ships that looked like they were built from scrap metal. Our tactical computers calculated a 99.7% chance of victory within 6 hours. The commander's hands began to shake slightly as he spoke. He gripped his cup tighter to hide the tremor. "I opened communications with their leader, expecting the usual negotiations. Most species try to bargain for better terms of surrender. The humans did something different. Their commander, a female named Captain Sarah Chun, looked directly into my eyes through the video link and said 5 words that I will never forget: 'We will not be slaves.'" Several veterans around the room exchanged glances. Defiant last stands were not uncommon among primitive species. "What made this different?" "I explained the futility of resistance," ZYX-941 continued. "I showed her our fleet strength, our technological advantages. I offered them generous terms: full citizenship in the collective, protection under galactic law, access to advanced technology. Most species would consider such an offer a gift." Captain Chun listened to everything I said. Then she smiled. The commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing his audience to lean in closer. She smiled, and she said, "Commander, you have no idea what you're about to face. Humans don't surrender. We don't negotiate. When someone threatens our families, our homes, our freedom, we fight. And we keep fighting until either we win or there's nothing left of us to fight with." A young Zalarian soldier laughed nervously. Brave words for someone facing impossible odds. ZYX-941's head snapped toward the Zalarian, his orange eyes blazing with an intensity that made the younger alien step back instinctively. "That's exactly what I thought," the commander hissed. "I terminated communications and gave the order to attack. Our first wave of fighters launched, confident in their superior numbers and technology. We outnumbered their defensive fighters 20-1. Victory seemed certain. The Krellian commander stood up slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows in the dim light. As he paced, his movements were careful and deliberate, like a predator that never quite forgot how to hunt. The human fighters moved differently than anything we had encountered before. Most species follow logical tactical patterns, maintain formation, preserve resources, minimize casualties. The humans threw their ships at our forces like guided missiles. They didn't try to preserve their craft or their lives. They flew directly into our formations, using their ships as weapons when their ammunition ran out. ZYX 941 stopped pacing and stared into the distance, lost in the memory. I watched a human pilot's fighter take critical damage. His engines were failing, his weapons offline. Any rational being would have ejected or surrendered. Instead, he aimed his crippled ship at our command cruiser and engaged his emergency thrusters. He punched through our shields and armor like they were paper. The explosion took out our entire port weapons array. The room was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the ventilation system seemed muted. That was when I realized we were not fighting a normal military engagement. These humans weren't trying to win a battle. They were making a statement. Every ship they lost, every pilot who died, it wasn't a defeat to them. It was a message. "What kind of message?" whispered the young Vorthan. ZYX 941's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The message was simple. "We will make this cost you everything." They knew they couldn't win against our superior numbers and technology. But they could ensure that taking their world would be so devastating, so expensive in blood and resources, that we would think twice before attacking another human colony. The commander sat back down heavily, his cup now empty. The bartender quietly refilled it without being asked. The battle lasted 18 hours instead of 6. When it ended, we had achieved our objective. The human defensive fleet was destroyed, their orbital stations captured. By all military standards, we had won decisively. But the cost? ZYX 941's voice trailed off. He stared at his reflection in the dark liquid, seeing not his own face but the faces of the dead. We lost 19 ships. 19 ships against 12 human defenders. In any other conflict, such losses would have been considered catastrophic. My superiors were not pleased. They demanded explanations. How could a primitive species inflict such damage on the mighty Third Fleet? A Nexarian veteran with bioluminescent patches covering his skin leaned forward. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth. The humans fight like madmen. They have no regard for their own safety, no respect for superior firepower, no understanding of when they are beaten. I recommended avoiding further conflict with their species until we could develop better strategies and technologies specifically designed to counter their unpredictable tactics." The commander's laugh was bitter and hollow. "My recommendation was rejected. High Command decided that one costly victory was acceptable. They assigned additional fleets to human space and ordered a full-scale invasion of their core worlds. I was given command of an entire battle group, 150 ships, and told to pacify the human home system within 1 month." ZYX 941 stood again and walked to the large window that dominated one wall of the Veterans Hall. Outside, the sprawling cityscape of the neutral world stretched to the horizon, filled with beings from dozens of different species, living in relative peace under galactic collective rule. "I should have refused the assignment," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I should have resigned my commission and retired to some quiet world where I could forget what I had seen. But I was a loyal officer. I followed orders. I led my fleet to Sol System, convinced that overwhelming force would succeed where tactical precision had failed." The reflection of ZYX 941's scarred face stared back at him from the window. Behind him, the gathered veterans waited in tense silence for him to continue. "When we arrived at Earth, we found something unexpected. The humans had been busy. In the 6 months since Kepler 442b, they had transformed their entire civilization into a war machine. Every factory, every shipyard, Every resource had been converted to military production. Their space was filled with defensive platforms, mines, and weapon satellites. The commander turned back to face his audience, his orange eyes reflecting the pain of memory. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the message waiting for us when we entered their system. It came from the same woman, Captain Chun, who had faced my fleet at Kepler 442b. She had been promoted to admiral. Her words were broadcast on every frequency, in every known galactic language. ZYX 941 closed his eyes, reciting from memory, "Welcome to Sol System, Commander ZYX 941. You have come to enslave or destroy humanity. You will fail. Every ship you lose here, every soldier who dies, will be one less threat to other free peoples in the galaxy. We know we cannot defeat the entire galactic collective, but we can make sure that defeating humanity costs so much that no other species will ever have to face what we face today. This is our gift to the galaxy. We will break your fleet so that others may remain free." When ZYX 941 opened his eyes again, several veterans in the room had gone pale. The implications of Admiral Chen's message were clear to anyone who understood military strategy. She was telling us that humanity had already accepted defeat, the commander continued. They knew they would lose. Earth would burn, their colonies would fall, their species would likely face extinction. But they were determined to make their destruction so costly that the collective would never again attempt to subjugate another species through force. The young Vorthan soldier who had asked the original question now looked sick. His tentacles had turned a pale green color that indicated extreme distress among his species. "How can anyone fight knowing they will lose?" he asked weakly. ZYX 941's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or despair. "That's exactly what I wondered." It defied every principle of military logic, every instinct for survival. No rational species would choose certain destruction over negotiated surrender. But humans are not rational. They are something far more dangerous. The commander walked back to his table and drained his cup in one long gulp. The alcohol burned, but it helped numb the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. The Battle of Earth lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks of continuous fighting unlike anything in galactic history. The humans threw everything they had at us: ships, stations, orbital platforms, even converted civilian vessels. They use tactics that no military academy teaches because they require the complete sacrifice of your own forces. ZYX 941's voice grew stronger now, as if telling the story was somehow purging him of the burden he had carried for so long. They would lure our ships into what appeared to be traps, then detonate hidden nuclear weapons that destroyed both their forces and ours. They sent unmarked cargo ships loaded with antimatter into the heart of our formations. Their fighter pilots would ram our capital ships when their weapons ran dry. Several veterans around the room had begun to look uncomfortable. Such tactics were considered war crimes under galactic law, violations of every accepted rule of civilized warfare. By the end of the first week, I had lost 60 ships. 60 ships against a force that should have been overwhelmed in the first day. My officers were beginning to show signs of psychological strain. Watching an enemy that fought with such desperate fury was affecting morale throughout the fleet. The commander's hands had stopped shaking now. Speaking about his experiences seemed to be having a therapeutic effect, as if sharing the burden made it lighter. But the humans were suffering too. Their defensive fleet was down to a handful of ships. Their orbital installations were heavily damaged. Earth itself was under bombardment. Any other species would have surrendered at that point. The humans kept fighting. ZYX 941 paused to look around the room. Every face was focused on him with rapt attention. Even veterans who had fought in dozens of conflicts seemed transfixed by his account. On the 10th day of battle, something changed. The human attacks became more coordinated, more focused. They stopped the random suicide runs and began targeting specific systems on our ships. It was as if they had learned our weaknesses and were adapting their tactics in real time. A scarred Drexlerian veteran with mechanical legs frowned. Adaptive tactics are not uncommon. Most species learn from battlefield experience. Not like this, ZYX 941 replied firmly. These weren't minor tactical adjustments. The humans were completely changing their approach to warfare based on what they had observed of our capabilities. In the space of a few hours, they went from desperate resistance to calculated assault. The commander began pacing again, his movements more agitated now. They had been studying us. Every attack they made, every ship they sacrificed, it was gathering intelligence. The humans had turned their own destruction into a learning experience. They were figuring out how to kill us more efficiently. The implications of this revelation sent a chill through the assembled veterans. An enemy that could adapt and learn in the midst of battle was far more dangerous than simple fanatical resistance. Admiral Chun contacted me directly on day 12. HFY 941 continued. By that point, Earth's surface was burning, most of their orbital defenses were destroyed, and their remaining ships numbered fewer than 20. I expected her to finally offer surrender terms. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper again. Instead, she thanked me. She said that fighting my fleet had taught humanity everything they needed to know about collective military doctrine. The data from our engagement would be transmitted to every human colony, every allied species, every potential resistance group in the galaxy. Our tactical patterns, our weaknesses, our standard procedures, all of it would be shared. HFY 941 stopped pacing and faced his audience directly. Then, she told me that Earth was just the beginning. Humanity had colonies throughout this spiral arm of the galaxy. Each one had been studying our engagement at Sol System. Each one was preparing defenses based on what they had learned. And each one would teach any attacking collective force even more about how to fight us effectively. The silence in the veterans' hall was deafening. Outside, the sounds of the city continued. Traffic, conversations, the normal noise of civilized life. But inside, the weight of HFY 941's words created an atmosphere of stunned disbelief. The humans had turned their entire species into a weapon designed specifically to defeat the Galactic Collective, the commander said quietly. Every battle, every defeat, every destroyed world would make the next human resistance more effective. They were not fighting to win individual engagements. They were fighting to create a learning curve that would eventually make them unbeatable. A veteran at the back of the room stood up abruptly and left without a word. The psychological implications of facing such an enemy were difficult for anyone who had served in the collective military to process. HFY 941 watched the departing figure with understanding. He had lived with these memories for years, and they still haunted his dreams. I had a choice to make, he continued. I could complete my mission, destroy Earth, and eliminate the human threat, or I could recognize what I was really facing and try to prevent a galaxy-wide catastrophe. The commander's orange eyes swept the room, meeting the gaze of each veteran present. What would you have done? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. HFY 941 could see the veterans around him struggling with the impossible choice he had faced. Complete the mission and potentially doom the galaxy to endless war, or disobey direct orders from high command and be branded a traitor. I made my decision during the 13th day of battle, the commander said finally. Admiral Chun had been right about one thing: the humans had learned everything they needed to know about our tactics. But I had learned something about them as well. Something that terrified me more than their willingness to die. A young Krellian officer near the bar shifted nervously. His blue scales had darkened to almost black, a clear sign of fear among their species. What did you learn, Commander? He asked hesitantly. HFY 941's mandibles clicked slowly as he considered his words. I learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers or their willingness to sacrifice everything. Their greatest strength was their ability to inspire others. During those 2 weeks of battle, I received communications from 17 different species within collective space. All of them had heard about the human resistance. All of them were asking the same question. If humans can fight back, why can't we? The implications hit the room like a physical blow. The Galactic Collective had maintained order for thousands of years through the simple principle that resistance was futile. No species could stand against their combined military might. But if one primitive species could inflict serious damage on a collective fleet, that principle would crumble. The Zenthari were the first to act. HFY 941 continued. Their homeworld had been under collective occupation for 3 centuries. They had accepted their status as a subordinate species and had provided resources and soldiers for our expansion. But when news of the Battle of Earth reached them, something changed. The commander walked back to the window, gazing out at the peaceful cityscape. But His eyes saw a different scene, star maps marking the spread of rebellion across half the galaxy. The Zenthari uprising began on day 14 of the Earth siege. It started small work stoppages, protests, minor acts of sabotage. Within hours, it had spread to every occupied Zenthari world. Within days, they had seized control of 3 entire star systems. A Vorthan veteran with prosthetic tentacles replacing those lost in battle looked confused. The Zenthari are pacifists by nature. They have never shown aggressive tendencies. That's what made it so shocking, HFY-941 replied. Peaceful species across the galaxy were suddenly finding their courage. The humans had shown them that the collective could bleed. If a newly discovered species could hurt us, what could an established civilization do with proper motivation? The commander turned back to face the room, his expression grim. I received new orders from High Command on the 15th day. Abandon the Earth siege immediately and respond to the Zenthari uprising. The brass was panicking. They had never faced simultaneous rebellions before. The whole structure of collective power was based on the assumption that resistance was impossible. HFY-941 returned to his table and signaled the bartender for another drink. The synthetic alcohol was doing little to dull his memories, but the familiar burn provided some small comfort. I tried to explain to my superiors that leaving Earth was exactly what the humans wanted. They had achieved their strategic objective. They had proven that the collective could be hurt. Every day their resistance continued, more species would be inspired to rebel. The only way to stop the spread of insurrection was to crush the human resistance completely and publicly. The commander's voice grew bitter. High Command disagreed. They believed that stopping the Zenthari rebellion quickly would discourage other potential uprisings. They ordered me to leave a minimal siege force at Earth and take the bulk of my fleet to Zenthari space. It was the worst strategic decision in collective military history. A Nexarian veteran with bioluminescent scars covering half his face leaned forward. What happened when you divided your forces? HFY-941's laugh was harsh and humorless. Exactly what Admiral Chun had predicted. The humans used our absence to break the siege and evacuate their homeworld. But they didn't just escape, they took everything with them. Every piece of technology, every weapon, every scrap of intelligence they had gathered about collective forces. Earth became a ghost world overnight. The commander paused to take a long drink, letting the implications sink in. The evacuation of Earth was unlike anything in galactic history. The humans didn't just move their population, they moved their entire industrial base, their research facilities, their military infrastructure. In the space of 72 hours, they converted their homeworld from a fortress into an empty shell. Several veterans around the room exchanged worried glances. The logistics of such an operation would have been staggering. It suggested a level of planning and coordination that most species could never achieve. Where did they go? Asked the young Krellian officer. Everywhere, HFY-941 replied simply. They scattered across the galaxy like seeds in the wind. Small groups moving fast, impossible to track. Some went to established colonies, others to unexplored systems. Many joined resistance movements on occupied worlds, bringing their knowledge of collective weaknesses with them. The commander stood and began pacing again, his movements agitated. By the time I reached Zenthari space, the rebellion had spread to 47 different systems. The humans had been there first, sharing their intelligence, teaching resistance tactics, providing technical assistance. Every rebel group in the sector was using modified human strategies to fight collective forces. HFY-941 stopped pacing and fixed his orange eyes on a Thraxian veteran near the back of the room. Tell me, Corax-77, you fought in the Zenthari campaign. What did you observe about rebel tactics during that conflict? The Thraxian veteran shifted uncomfortably, his cybernetic implants whirring softly. The rebels fought differently than we expected. They used coordinated strikes against supply lines, targeted communication networks, employed asymmetric warfare strategies that disrupted our standard operational procedures. Human strategies, HFY-941 confirmed. Every tactic the Zenthari rebels used, every weapon modification, every intelligence technique, all of it came from human military doctrine. The humans had turned the entire sector into a laboratory for testing anti-collective warfare. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how effective it was. Within 6 months, collective forces had been driven out of 23 star systems. Species that had been subjugated for centuries were suddenly free, and all because one primitive species had shown them that resistance was possible. A long silence settled over the room. The veterans present understood military strategy well enough to grasp the implications. If human tactics could liberate dozens of systems in a matter of months, what would happen when those tactics spread throughout the galaxy? The war lasted 4 more years. HFY 941 continued. 4 years of constant fighting as rebellion spread from sector to sector. The humans were always there, always one step ahead, teaching and learning and adapting. Every victory we achieved was temporary. Every defeat they suffered made them stronger. The commander sat down heavily, suddenly, looking far older than his years. I fought humans directly 7 more times during those 4 years. Each engagement was different. They never used the same tactics twice. They studied every battle, learned from every mistake, shared every lesson with other resistance groups. Fighting them was like fighting an enemy that grew smarter with each defeat. A young Zalarian soldier who had been silent throughout the evening finally spoke up. But surely the collective's superior technology and numbers eventually won out? We control most of the galaxy even today. HFY 941's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You think we won? Look around you, soldier. Look at where we are. The Zalarian glanced around the veteran's hall, confusion evident on his features. We're on Nexus Prime, a neutral world under collective protection. Exactly, HFY 941 said quietly. A neutral world. When I was your age, there were no neutral worlds. Every inhabited system was either part of the collective or in the process of being conquered. Now we have entire sectors that operate under negotiated autonomy agreements. We have species that maintain their independence through mutual defense pacts. We have regions of space where collective forces are not welcome. The implications slowly dawned on the younger veterans. The galaxy they knew, with its patchwork of sovereign species and autonomous regions, was not the galaxy the collective had originally intended to create. The humans forced us to change our entire approach to galactic governance, HFY 941 explained. We could no longer simply conquer and absorb new species. The cost had become too high. Every subjugated world was a potential source of rebellion. Every occupied system required constant military presence to maintain order. The commander's voice grew stronger as he continued, as if sharing these truths was lifting a weight from his shoulders. Admiral Chun contacted me one final time, near the end of the war. By then, she was leading the Human Liberation Fleet, a combined force of human ships and vessels from 17 allied species. Her message was simple. The war can end today, Commander. All you have to do is stop fighting. HFY 941 paused to meet the eyes of each veteran in the room. She was offering a ceasefire, not surrender, not negotiation, not terms of defeat. She was offering to stop killing collective soldiers if we would stop trying to enslave free peoples. The choice was entirely ours. The young Vorthan soldier who had started this conversation shifted nervously. What did you do? I did what any rational military commander would do when faced with an enemy that had proven they could not be defeated through conventional means, HFY 941 replied. I contacted High Command and recommended immediate acceptance of human terms. The commander's laugh was bitter. They court-martialed me for that recommendation, charged me with cowardice, defeatism, and conduct unbecoming an officer. They stripped me of rank and sentenced me to exile on this neutral world. But 6 months later, they quietly negotiated the same ceasefire I had recommended. The room fell silent again as the veterans processed this information. Many of them had heard rumors about high-ranking officers being disciplined for unauthorized communication with enemy forces, but the full story had never been revealed. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Kepler Station. HFY 941 continued. The collective agreed to abandon all expansion activities and recognize the sovereignty of free species. In return, human forces agreed to cease active hostilities and establish formal diplomatic relations. A Drexlarian veteran with mechanical arms frowned. But that was 15 years ago. Surely the situation has stabilized since then? HFY 941's orange eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. Stabilized? Is that what you call it? The galaxy is divided into hundreds of independent territories, each with its own defense forces and technological development programs. Former collective species are forming their own alliances and trade agreements. The Thraxian Confederacy, the Vorthan Free States, the Zenthari Republic, none of these existed before humans showed us that resistance was possible. The commander stood and walked to a star chart mounted on the wall of the Veterans Hall. The map showed the current political structure of the galaxy, a complex patchwork of sovereign territories, neutral zones, and autonomous regions. This is what humanity accomplished, he said, gesturing to the chart. Not conquest, not domination, but liberation. They forced the entire galaxy to evolve beyond the simple predator-prey relationship that had defined interstellar politics for millennia. ZYX-941 turned back to face his audience, his expression serious. But the most terrifying part of all this is not what the humans accomplished during the war. It's what they're doing now in peacetime. The veterans leaned forward, sensing that the commander was building to some crucial revelation. They're still out there, ZYX-941 said quietly. Still learning, still adapting, still teaching other species how to resist oppression. They've established what they call the Free Species Alliance, a mutual defense pact that now includes over 200 different civilizations. The commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And they're still sending observers to every military conflict in the galaxy. Every war, every skirmish, every border dispute. There are always human ships watching from the sidelines, taking notes, gathering intelligence. They're building a comprehensive database of military tactics and technologies from every species in known space. Several veterans around the room had gone pale. The implications were staggering. They're preparing for the next war, ZYX-941 stated flatly. Not planning it, not starting it, but preparing for it. They know that eventually, some species will try to rebuild a galactic empire. When that happens, humanity will be ready. And so will every species they've taught to fight. The commander returned to his seat, suddenly, looking exhausted. That's why I drink alone in veterans' halls, he said quietly. That's why I wake up screaming from nightmares about burning ships and dying worlds. Not because of what happened during the war, but because of what I know is coming. He lifted his cup and stared into the dark liquid. We didn't defeat humanity. We just taught them how to defeat us. And now they're teaching everyone else. The Veterans Hall had grown cold despite the heating systems working at full capacity. The weight of ZYX-941's words seemed to draw warmth from the very air itself. Several aliens had quietly left during his account, unable to process the full implications of what they were hearing. Those who remained sat in stunned silence, staring at the scarred Krellian commander who had just shattered their understanding of galactic politics. A new voice broke the silence. You speak of humans as if they're still planning for war, but I've worked with them. Everyone turned to see a tall Valdorian female stepping forward from the shadows near the back wall. Her silver skin bore the distinctive markings of a diplomatic corps veteran, and her multiple eyes showed the keen intelligence typical of her species. Ambassador Thelcora, ZYX-941 said with surprise. I didn't know you were here. I arrived during your account of the Zenthari uprising, she replied, moving gracefully between the tables. I've been listening to your version of events with great interest. As someone who worked directly with human diplomatic teams for 5 years after the war, I have a different perspective on their current activities. The commander's mandibles clicked nervously. And what perspective is that? Thelcora settled into a chair across from ZYX-941, her forearms folding in a gesture that indicated formal discourse among her people. The humans are not preparing for war, Commander. They're preventing it. Every conflict they observe, every military engagement they study, is part of a comprehensive peacekeeping strategy that most species don't understand. ZYX-941's orange eyes narrowed. Explain. The Valdorian ambassador activated a small holographic projector from her diplomatic pouch. Images of star charts, fleet movements, and conflict zones appeared in the air above their table. During my tenure with the Interspecies Cooperation Council, I had access to classified human strategic documents. What you interpret as preparation for war is actually something far more sophisticated, active conflict prevention through superior intelligence gathering. She gestured to one of the holographic displays showing recent territorial disputes between two minor species. 3 months ago, the Keltorian Empire began massing forces near Drachmoth territory. Traditional diplomatic intervention would have involved lengthy negotiations, economic sanctions, and ultimately military peacekeeping forces if violence broke out. The human approach was different. The display shifted to show ship movement patterns and communication intercepts. Human observers had been monitoring both species for signs of growing tension. When the Keltorian buildup began, they didn't contact the collective or the interspecies council. Instead, they shared specific intelligence with both sides, detailed information about each other's military capabilities, battle plans, and likely casualties from any conflict. ZYX 941 leaned forward, studying the data. Intelligence sharing during a crisis is not unusual. Many species use such tactics. Not like this, Thelcora replied firmly. The humans didn't just share basic military intelligence. They provided complete tactical analyses of how any war between the Keltorians and Drachmoth would unfold. Hour-by-hour projections of battle outcomes, casualty estimates for every engagement, economic impact assessments, projected duration of conflict, and, most importantly, detailed explanations of why neither side could achieve their strategic objectives through military action. The ambassador manipulated the hologram to show a complex decision tree with thousands of branching possibilities. They presented both species with a complete simulation of the war they were contemplating. Every possible tactical choice, every likely response, every potential outcome. The Keltorian commanders could see exactly how their invasion would fail. The Drachmoth defenders could see exactly how their resistance would collapse. Both sides realized that war would accomplish nothing except mutual destruction. A young Thraxian pilot who had been listening intently spoke up. But how could the humans predict military outcomes so precisely? Battle simulations are notoriously unreliable. Thelcora's multiple eyes focused on the pilot with something resembling pity. Because they have fought both species, Lieutenant. Not recently, not officially, but human military advisors have worked with Keltorian forces during border conflicts with pirates. Human engineers have helped upgrade Drachmoth defensive systems. Human observers have watched both militaries in action for decades. They know exactly how these forces fight, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how they would perform against each other. The implications sent a chill through the assembled veterans. If humans possessed such detailed intelligence about every military force in the galaxy, their knowledge of potential conflicts, wow.